Just wanted to welcome everyone. Thanks so much for spending some time out of your afternoon. We're joined here by Matt DiBara of the Contractor Consultants. Him and I are going to have a conversation about, hiring, retaining talent in 2022, which pretty much every single home improvement contractor I talk to, doesn't matter if you're in the roofing space, doesn't matter if you're in the kitchen remodeling space, it's something that's really top of mind, it seems like, for everyone at this point. And so before we get started, we'll get started in just about 3 minutes here. Feel free to write in the comments and in the chat your name and where you're joining us from. And then throughout the conversation, also feel free to take advantage of that chat. Write us any questions that can really help inform our conversation. We're going to talk to not only actually going out and recruiting talent, but we're going to talk about being able to retain talent, being able to make sure that you have people doing the right tasks and the right roles. So feel free to drop anything in the chat here. And Matt, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you have the Contractor Consultants, but as we have people coming on, you have pretty interesting background on not only owning a masonry company, but being able to talk to the homeowner too. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm horrible to bring to a cocktail party because I only know like two things or two areas of the world. I started fourth generation family construction company, and I grew up in the field. My first day I was 9 years old on the job, and I got to see the family business grow. We've grown it a lot since then out here in Los Angeles. And I've just spent my entire life, being with residential and commercial job sites, working with homeowners, and then also growing the business, starting from, picking up trash to laborer to then installing the work, managing crews, hiring, then running the whole company, and then growing it. So it's the hiring piece is and what we're going to be talking about today is probably my favorite topic though, because it's where I saw my dad struggle the most growing up. He was always had just enough people, and they were in and out, and he was constant. And so this is huge passion for me. I saw what it looks like when you get it right, and I also saw what it looks like if you struggle. So I'm really looking forward to this.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And I think it's interesting to think about, you can have all the other pieces of your business functioning at 100%. Right? Like you can have the best materials, you can have the most compelling pricing, but if you don't have salespeople able to sell it, and you don't have the production people able to actually install it, you don't have enough people, it's going to be really hard to see the business grow. And especially growing in a planned way, where I think you touch a lot on this, and in conversations you and I have had before on making sure that there's a process in place, and you can't have a process if you don't have enough employees to run the process ultimately.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where I wish we, as an industry, we emphasize this point more. One of the first things we talk about in the course is I call team, I break it out, and I say, look, next time you think about team, I want you to think of it as time, energy, and money, because it's a commitment, and to build the team that you want takes all four of those parts. And it's not to say it's like huge thing that's impossible, but it's a consistent applied effort every day that needs to happen if you want to be able to take control of your recruiting, which in turn is how you take control of your company and your growth.
No, that makes total sense. Great. Well, we're at just about 4 o'clock here Central. It looks like we just had a bunch of people join us right at the top of the hour, and we'll give everyone a minute longer. It looks like we had Lynn right in joining us from Pennsylvania. Hopefully it's nice and cool in Pennsylvania. But as people are filing in, feel free to drop in the chat your name, where you're joining us from. What we're going to cover today is myself and Matt are going to have a conversation around how to hire and retain talent in 2022, which, in talking to pretty much any home improvement contractor, that's a huge issue. And it's not even actually exclusive to the home improvement space. But we'll give one more minute here. And awesome. I also went ahead and put in a poll question. So feel free as we go through in our conversation this afternoon to drop any questions that you have in the chat, as well as answer the poll. But we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. For those who didn't hear before, my name is Sarah Krebs, and I'm the head of partnerships here at Hearth. And what we're going to be covering today is having a conversation with Matt about how to not only hire, but retain top talent here in 2022. So first off, I think when we kind of dive into the agenda. We're going to look at why is it so hard to actually find good workers? And then we're going to talk to you how to find, how to vet, how to hire, and how to actually retain your employees. And as I mentioned before, my name's Sarah Krebs. I am the head of partnerships here at Hearth. And Matt, do you want to just give us a quick introduction on yourself?
Yeah, I'm Matt DiBara, fourth generation and current owner of DiBara Masonry here in Los Angeles. Also CEO and co-founder of the Contractor Consultants. And we've also put together the contractor hiring course.
Which is exactly why we're having him on. And here at Hearth, we are focused on residential consumer financing. So we help contractors of all sizes within all verticals be able to offer their homeowners financing options. And we know that that works pretty much hand in hand with any part of your sales process, retaining salespeople, et cetera. But we'll go ahead and jump into it. Something that I think is really important when we're thinking about finding talent is the market's different. Matt will talk a lot about when, he's been a part of a family business for a while. So I think he's had a really unique perspective and been able to see the talent market really change over the past 50 years, especially when it comes to the residential construction space. And ABC, which really puts out pretty much quarterly reports on talent in the home improvement industry, recently released a report saying that at this point, the construction industry will need to hire at least 650,000 workers on top of its normal hiring in order to keep pace with demand. And that number is staggering. I think when we all think about 650,000 people, it's kind of understanding where are these people going to come from. And when we look at the trends over the past couple of years, we've really seen that for every 3 skilled tradesmen that retires, right now, we're actually only having about 1 of those tradesmen come in to fill their role. 20% of these skilled workers that, are probably around the age of 50, 60 that are starting to retire, they've just left the profession altogether. And I think COVID was a really incredible time for the home improvement industry, but unfortunately also showed a lot of these labor shortages. And in polling, 63% of home improvement contractors have experienced a labor shortage in the past 2 years. So this is an issue that's really top of mind for pretty much everyone within the industry. And because of that, and Matt actually will say, he's been seeing this as someone in the industry for what, Matt, did you say the past 5 years? You've noticed these trends?
Yeah, it really started to heat up about 5-6 years ago. A lot of people in the field where the talk was that, people don't work as hard as they used to. It's hard to find people. And I noticed something shifted big time. And I think 5 or 6 years ago is when I really saw it.
And what do you think played into that shift? What happened that we used to have this huge backlog of people that we could call out and come onto these jobs, where now maybe we just don't have as big, I don't want to use the word like a bench, like a sports team, but we used to have a huge bench where we could call, our subs. And we were talking about it earlier, subcontractors, GCs had all the power. And they were, they're like, oh, I'll just call another, flooring company, no problem. What was the dynamic change there that happened over the past couple of years?
Well, I went to a vocational high school, and that wasn't a popular thing to do even 12 years ago. So it was certainly something that was dying down. But 2008 pushed out a lot of the baby boomers. I knew a lot of companies, dozens of companies that, my dad was friends with, that were like, look, I've been through 3 of these, I'm done, I'm going to retire. And I saw that again a little bit in COVID. And then I watched as, tech became more prevalent. And then you Uber Eats and Postmates and TaskRabbit and all of these other things that allow for, quick, easy money. And it changed the dynamic of who's entering the workforce. And it's really 2 factors, right? It's who's entering and who's leaving. And I saw a great reduction in the amount of people entering. And I saw a huge increase in the amount of people leaving the industry, selling businesses, wanting to retire. And I was like, we're going to be left with this gap. And it's a huge opportunity, because for the people who don't see this coming, huge problem. For the people who do, and you're ahead of this curve, it is absolutely transformative to your business.
Absolutely. And most home improvement companies aren't even thinking about that at this time. Maybe right now where they're starting to understand it when they go on Indeed and they post a job app and they get no applications for maybe 2 months, that they're like, okay, clearly there's something here. So I know that you and the entire team over at the Contractor Consultants have really been building out a program step by step to understand the best ways not only to recruit talent, but keep them on board and really allow your HR team to have like a function within the home improvement space. So I will kind of start with like the finding talent piece of it, because there's so many different steps when it comes to actually onboarding employees, et cetera. But finding talent is where we'll start. And I think something that I love that you said earlier is asking yourself as an owner, would you work for you? If you Googled your company tomorrow, are you going to work for you? So tell me a little bit about that phrase, and kind of after a home improvement contractor Googles themselves, what should they look for when they're thinking about how that impacts their recruiting efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I used to sit with my dad when he would meet with the yellow page person, right? Advertising decision. It was the only one he made twice a year, and they were like, Mr. DiBara, you want a full page or a half page ad? And so I saw the trend from that to websites, and then from websites to video. And so this ties into your question, because now we live in a digital landscape, and the first thing somebody does when they see any job posting available is they're going online and they're Googling the company. And you can have this great local reputation, but if your website or, it doesn't have an about video or an about page, and I can't see photos of, who's in the company or your office or your trucks, it creates a little bit of skepticism. And we found that if you Google your company name and you're not excited, you don't see anything where you're like, wow, I'd really want to work for this company, that's a huge potential opportunity that you can take advantage of. A career video being one of them, where it basically interviews a few of your employees and talks about the culture and showcases some of your jobs that you've done. But the would you work for you kind of honest audit, if you didn't know yourself, is a huge way to start the process.
Right, because then you can identify the gaps, right? Because then you're like, okay, if I'm someone that I'm trying to recruit and I come onto this website, what's going to be important for me to see? And just as you mentioned, even putting like where your business is actually located. I'm surprised at the amount of, roofing, HVAC, it doesn't matter the industry. They don't have pictures of their building, pictures of their truck on their site, and doing small things like that is important. And I think you talk about really like adapting to more digital technologies, right? So like, I know that you guys have talked about geofencing in order to do recruiting, digital posting, whether that be on Facebook, whether that be on Indeed, ZipRecruiter. And how do you see companies balance, those new forms of recruiting with the old school methods that are tried and true and that have always worked?
Well, when we were putting together the course, we were discussing, we're like, well, do we include all the old school stuff like that my dad and grandfather did? And even, my great grandfather, stories passed down from him, and how much digital. And we realized that because it's so hard to find talent right now, you really need to do all of it. So I took, the old school, what we call the tried and true methods, which are like recruiting cards and aggressive referral bonuses. And one of them is working with your suppliers to create relationships, because that's where a lot of your potential employee candidates go. So like we do at DiBara Masonry, we do once a week a coffee and donuts booth at my suppliers, and we've got cards that basically say we're hiring, and in exchange for providing this service that benefits the supplier, we get in front of our candidates. And if they've had a bad day that morning and DiBara Masonry is offering top pay, you'd be surprised at the amount of calls we get. It really works. You get them in the morning when they're like, oh, I got yelled at because I was 2 minutes late, and then here we are, we're like, hey, if you want, Yeah,
we're handing you a donut, and possibly, better pay, more closer to a company mission. Like that's a huge value proposition.
Exactly. And then the digital strategies, it's a blend. I mean, we talk about in the course, right? If they're not on your find list, they'll never be on your hire list. So it's about, there's no single, I talk to most contractors and they're like, yeah, I've done Craigslist and I've done Indeed, but it's really about going as wide as you possibly can in this climate. Like you can't overdo it. We go into all of that, and literally handing out recruiting cards everywhere that your candidate goes, the trade school relationships, talking to them and getting alumni lists, building relationships with workers' comp companies, insurance companies. I've hired people. I hired somebody, I was getting a lab work done. and I ended up making a hire for a laborer for my company. I was talking to her and I said, she's like, oh, my nephew's looking for work. I said, hey, here's my card with my information. There's a referral bonus if you send him over. He calls me up 3 days later. He's hired a week after that. Like, I mean, it needs that level of commitment. But it's small things, right? It's a lot of small things done well, rather than like one big magic bullet.
Absolutely. And a lot of that stuff is free.
Exactly.
Like, you don't have to pay for ads. Like, if you go to, a local vocational school and you're just make a relationship with the teacher there or the dean there, like, that's a free connection. And I think like being able to take advantage of digital is fantastic, but it can get costly, especially if you don't always know what you're doing. So making sure that you are doing a combination of everything. Love that. And then when you're thinking about actually going out and finding talent, a really important piece of that is, the job description. Like, what is this person's day-to-day tasks actually going to be? Because you need to have that down before you even start looking for someone to fill the role. So how in the current economy with, supply chain and, this kind of labor shortage, what are ways that you're working to actually allocate tasks for each job that you're hiring? How do you determine, okay, I need, let's say, a new administrative assistant in my office. Like, how do you break down what their day-to-day will look like?
So we call that, in the course, we call that a clear understanding. And basically what we say is a couple principles, right? The first is high pay, high skill. So, and what we do is we audit it. We recommend auditing all of your job roles and looking at the different departments and the crossover. So the end goal of a business, right, fundamentally, and when we're talking about hiring, is I want to pay high pay for high skill, and I want specialization and departments. So we try and avoid the crossover of like, oh, my salesperson also does this in my, field related work. And so we basically give a framework of how to audit all of the different roles you have and then take their day-to-day tasks. So daily, weekly, monthly, what does each role need to do? And then start looking at it and saying, okay, like, for example, I had a site superintendent who would pick up samples of like different materials. So matching brick or stone. And we thought it was good because we're like, oh, he's already out on the road. Then we figured it out, and I'm like, he's spending 6 to 8 hours a week, one of my highest paid positions, picking up material that I could have, my yard attendant do. So even for me, I mean, when I go through the exercise every 6 months or a year, I'm like, oh wait, when it's in a column, I'm like, that doesn't make too much sense. I should change this. And that crafts the role, so that way kind of who exactly you're hiring for, and then the job description gets built off of that because you're just taking those job duties, thinking through it in a daily, weekly, and monthly format and putting it in the job description.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And so moving on to, let's say we've mastered finding talent. We're diversified in our sources. We Google ourselves, it's fantastic. And we have some really, really strong job descriptions that we put together. So the next piece is strategies to actually vet and hire employees. And I think something that I loved in watching kind of I got a sneak peek walkthrough of your course. And I think something that's really interesting to think about is the importance of interviewing. And not just making sure that you're bringing in good candidates to interview, but that you're auditing what you actually say during the interview process. And so if you could just kind of walk us through maybe what are a couple essential questions that you ask candidates during interviews and that you think are really, really important to be asking during either it's a formal or informal interview.
Got it. So there's 4 stages of if you're doing the find right, you're going to have a massive candidate flow, right? So then we create this bottleneck because we're like, how do we get through all these people and sift out we break it into 3 categories. So we say not right now, or good, and they move on to the next phase. So the first thing is we want to have an applicant tracking system where we can track everybody, and we're breaking it down into those buckets. Perfect example is a mechanic. We needed one, we grew to a certain phase and we needed to bring somebody in-house. I had somebody where they put it in the not right now pile. So in my applicant tracking system, it was like, wow, this guy followed up 3 or 4 times and was really great. So they put them underneath like mechanic skills. And so it's so valuable to have all of this data, for good, because you never know when the business is going to change or somebody might call you. There's a lot of benefits for that. But there's 4 stages. So you want to sort your candidates quickly. So that's the 3 buckets we just mentioned. Then there's the informal interview, formal interview, and then some sort of skills assessment. Now, this changes based on the role. So an informal interview might be something really quick, like, a screener, basically 3 to 5 questions. Usually, like, for example, if it's a lower skill position. It's, you have a driver's license, where do you live? Tell us a few things that you're, really great at. I'm simplifying here. We give exact questions, but it's a 3 to 5 question, 5 to 10 minute. How do they present themselves on the call? And then what you're referring to is that formal interview is that sit down where you're getting into much more, you're covering much more territory. The easiest way to set that up, the formal interview, is, and you can do it one of two ways. You can have them start from most recent and work their way backwards, or you can have them start from kind of their beginning career journey. I like from most recent going backwards, because that's usually what I'm concerned with the most is what have you been doing the last 1 to 3 years?
Right. And is it applicable to the skills that I'm going to be looking for when we're hiring for this role?
Exactly. So that sets kind of your parameters. That gives you the foundation of the conversation. So there's an introduction to the interview. And then you go and you start kind of peeling apart their experience so that you understand it, right? So, or dissecting the resume rather. So taking the resume and translating it into tangible experiences. And then from there, you're diving into certain elements, why they left their job, or they're like, oh, I didn't like this, or, oh, we did a lot of this type of work. And then you're able to kind of pivot and identify deeper the cultural questions that you might want, where it's like, well, I didn't get along with my manager. Oh, well, what did that, tell me a little bit more about that. What did that look like? I mean, you can find out, did they leave bad culture, or were they a part of bad culture?
Right.
And you get a good feel for that, because, it's one or the other. But that's kind of the general format of the formal interview. And I think the most important thing, what really helped us, and has helped a lot of contractors, is having a skills assessment. Because, like, for example, if you want to work at DiBara Masonry, let's say, and you're like, hey, I'm a foreman, I've been doing this 30 years, I can do like block and brick and stone. We say, great, we do a quick interview with you. We usually do an informal, and then we'll have you go right to a paid skills assessment. You come to my yard and you build a small block wall, a small brick wall. You pour a little bit of concrete. We have like an actual worksheet that we give them. We're like, great, you have 8 hours, it's paid. Here's your water, here's your restroom. And that's that. And we're able to weed out, what's great and what's not very quickly. And so identifying that is huge.
And I think doing a skills assessment in really any part of the job, whether you're hiring for, the production side of the business and it's someone who's going to be actually building out the jobs, or it's someone who's in the interior, like making sure that when you're hiring a marketing manager, actually giving them a task and giving them a case study of like, how would you scale Google spend if you're going to do that? Or how would you plan to actually grow our billboards and track leads? And so making sure that people actually have skills, because I think we both encountered this too. It's people talk a lot of game about how good they are, but actually like, where does the rubber meet the road there is really important.
And it's nice for the other reason too, is you're able to really reward those who can do exceptional work, right? You get to see it and you're like, wow, this is not just good, this is great. And so again, having even sales or any role really, there needs to be some specific way that you're going to measure the skill set of that person and do it quickly, because you don't want to have 3, 4, 5 interviews and you want the streamlined process, because I'll tell you, if they're a good candidate, they can get scooped up within a couple days, a week. I mean, they're gone. So you want to be like, great, here's the next step. I'll see you here. Like, you want to move quickly. Speed is very important.
And I think that's a mistake that I've seen a lot of home improvement companies make when it comes to hiring, is that the interview process is very drawn out. There's not like an organized step A, they don't have the 4 steps essentially when they start it. So it's, Cheryl will give you a call back when we decide to move forward. And then the candidate's kind of in the lurch. They don't know exactly what to expect. Is that something that you've seen when a lot of the contractors you guys have been starting to coach up, that it's this unorganized process that's leading to a lot of applicants kind of falling out of the funnel?
Yeah, it's that. And it's also not having a way to properly escalate. So when we, and I didn't touch on this, but when you're doing that sorting, right, not right now, that type of sorting, we also have a bucket called the exceptional candidate. And that person is like Monopoly. They skip all the steps and they just go right to like, we advocate that if it's a very hard role and you see this dream resume, like, immediately like that moment, literally send it over to the next person and make sure that that's scheduled and then follow up. Because just like you wouldn't treat all leads the same, based on the spend and location and all of that, or type of work rather. It's the same thing in the recruiting space. If that person comes along right away, you want to make sure you're following up.
Right. You vet them and you hire them as fast as possible,
Yes.
Especially if you know that they come from a competitor, you know that they have the right background. Or I think following up with people who are referrals, because referrals are always going to make your best hires because they're already connected to the company. So making sure that you're keeping those people like high priority. in the hiring process. And my last question for you on this piece is, the job market's so competitive right now. And something that I've heard, I actually heard it last week. I went to a regional meeting in Miami, and I heard two people say that, something that they're having is people essentially are leaving their company to go to a different company who does the same thing down the street for $1 more an hour. So what are ways that you at either DiBara have done this, or you've seen other companies differentiate themselves beyond just their wage in order to attract and retain employees?
I hear it all the time. I hear contractors that are like, oh, this person's asking for this much money and it's crazy. And I'm like, it's not. Like, if you understand the supply demand economics of what's happening right now in the hiring space, typically it's not crazy. Now, every so often you get that. But so we really think in terms of culture, things that can make them feel special. I mean, we do relocation bonuses, we do sign-on bonuses. We definitely try and hit, if 20 or 30% above market pay. And we even go as far as to, we talk about this, calling and understanding what your competitors are paying so that you're ahead of that pay scale. But then the feel good stuff, like, we do company breakfasts. So we have, once a month we get the team together, whole company. Then we do every Friday, company has breakfast for them. So they show up, all my staff in the field get a breakfast. Gosh, there's so many. A massage. So like we do things where we get the guys that are working out in the field, guys and gals, massages. So like, if they have a really hard week, or we do it every 2 weeks, things that we really ask, what can you do that would make somebody be excited? So an example of that, and also it's not, one of the really interesting things is it's not always a new thing. It's something you already have that you're not accentuating enough. So for example, we have a contractor, and he's a stucco contractor. And we were working with him, and his work is hyper local. Like, he's been doing this so long that his farthest job is like 8 miles away. I'm like, wow. Why are we not advertising that as you don't go further than 8 miles away? You know what I mean? It's every job is within a 10-minute drive.
Right. From a recruiting standpoint, any person who's working on his production team is like, especially with gas prices the way it is, I only have to drive 7 miles. I'm so in.
And that's what I mean. And so he was like, you really think that's a big deal? I'm like, that should be the first thing I was like, before the job description, put that bullet. I was like, please note, like, and that was one example. Another one was type of work. One person does really, really big, exceptional jobs. Another one does lots of small jobs that you get to see different types of work. Another is really multifaceted in the way they train people. So it's taking an honest look, and you can audit this with your team as well and ask them, hey, why do you work here? What are some really cool things that you enjoy about working here? That's how we found out about the distance. One of the guys was like, I love not being able to drive really far. And I was like, that's it. That's the thing. He didn't tell us that. So yeah.
Totally. It's looking and saying, okay, this is what we're going to pay per hour. It's competitive. We've done the right market research, but what else makes the employees who've been here for 5 years stay here for 5 years? Is it maybe like lunch and learns we do on Wednesdays that are stupid, but everyone loves? Is it, the fact that right next door is this amazing place that makes lunch for people on Thursdays? Like, whatever it is, just making sure that that's clear to people. No, I love that. And then the last thing that we'll touch on here is just really touching on ways that we can increase employee retention. When we looked at data, in the home improvement industry across every vertical, retention is a huge problem. Right now, I think it's looking at like 20% of employees retained for more than a year, typically. And that's in actually roofing specific, which does tend to be more high turnover. But what are 3 things or a couple of different strategies that a residential construction company can do that aren't a huge lift, but can be used to increase their retention?
Yeah, so retention is a couple of things, and it branches out into overall culture. So it's what's the culture climate of your company? Because if you have good culture, retention it certainly helps, right? So we put, one of the things we say in the course is culture and recruiting is the perfect marriage, right? Because one feeds the other. If culture is weak, you can do all the hiring that you want, but then if you lose people in 3, 4, 5 months, it's just this broken cycle. So really, really, really emphasizing the culture. The other big part is setting up new hires for success. So we talk about kind of the first 2 weeks, but hyper focused on the first few days, giving them all the assets they need, having an onboarding plan, letting them make sure they have logins and access to everything and the right tools. That's a huge component of it. And that stems back to the clear understanding, right? So you've audited so it's really, there is a very linear system. You can see where the weak points are. If you clearly identify within your company the job roles and you're hyper focused on that, and then you've done a good job to fortify the culture you have now, do you acknowledge birthdays? Do you have, like we talked about, your lunch and learns, or, things that get the team excited? What's that look like? And then if you take somebody, bring them in, they sign the offer letter, you've got a really good 2-week plan, you've got your onboarding plan, they have all the assets. And then from there, they roll into a culture where employees have surveys. That's so important. We talk about the difference between perception and reality. I mean, I could give you 100 stories about just the silliest things in companies that you're like, how did you feel like this? And how did you not notice that? But being able to survey how everyone feels and have a culture where it's okay to have feedback is so important. And from there, I mean, it's hard to miss. You've got the right person doing the right thing. You've set them up well for 2 weeks. You've put them in an environment that's good. And if they have any hiccups along the way, you've created a culture and a communication plan where they know who they go to for what issue.
Absolutely. And I think also not being afraid of feedback both ways. I think something that I've seen is, managers always feel really comfortable giving feedback to their employees, but as businesses grow, there's increasing changes to the business, also feeling really comfortable. And this is where a survey comes into play, asking employees what you can change as a leader. Because I think having that open communication both ways will enable you to understand where the problems are in that funnel, right? Whether it was they didn't feel like their expectations were set correctly in the job description, you'll find that out in a survey. You'll know that really quickly, and you'll be able to then make adjustments so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, you do as much as you can to set everything up. And then the last thing is, well, if things aren't perfect for whatever reason, we need that clear communication channel. And like you said, being open to that is so important. And having a way for them to do it anonymously as well as bring it forward. I mean, that's why we do and we specifically recommend a software that allows them to basically survey anonymously. So it's not like, people, some people do handwritten, they're like, yeah, write your response. It's like, well, we all know the handwriting of everybody here. So
it's going to be awkward when I write feedback for someone who I don't work with every day. And then I hand it to them and they're like, oh, this is clearly John's handwriting.
Well, yeah, exactly.
No, that makes a ton of sense. We do have one question from John. He's asking Matt, and I agree with this because I think this is one of the more important things you said. If you could just repeat the 4 stages of the interview process again. So when it comes to sorting all the way until the skills assessment. So I know there's sorting and then the interviews, but if you could walk through that.
I even took some notes because I was like, there's so much from this course that we have, and I wanted to make sure that we got some specific stuff. So yeah, first it's an informal sort. So the candidates come through either by text, call, email. They get put into an applicant tracking system and they get tagged based on, not right at all, not right now, or, good, or there's that exceptional candidate that you're just kind of like, they're skipping the line. Then from there, you want to do a quick screening, which we call the informal interview. And that's that, 3 to 5 question, very quick, how do you present on the phone? And you weed out, will they show up on time? Do they answer the phone? If you miss them, and they tell you, hey, call me back later. Okay, great. I'll talk to you at 8. You get so much information from that. Then there's the formal interview where you sit down. It could be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on the position. And sometimes there's multiple formal interviews if it's a big hiring decision. Yep. And then the last part is the skills assessment. So the interview, I've made all these promises. I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. Great. Taking notes and then saying, awesome. So here's the next step. We'd like to put those to work, and making sure that skills assessment, we highly, highly recommend that it's paid, and check your, local labor regulations. But typically when you ask for something of that caliber, it's best to compensate for that.
Absolutely. And that paid time is a small price to pay to make sure that you're recruiting someone who's going to be a value add to the team. In the short term, it's like, oh, I'm paying this person, but they're not actually going to be on a site working for me. But then when you think about it in the long term, I might stop myself from wasting many hours trying to teach this person this skill, or having to deal with, the firing process when they actually cannot promise on the skills that they outlined that they did have. No, that makes a ton of sense. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your wisdom.
Sure.
And I would love if you could tell everyone a little bit more about where they can find you and the best way to reach out to you.
Yeah, if you head to the website, the Contractor Consultants, we have it up there. I mean, gosh, I could talk about this for 4 hours and probably still not hit everything that we have. We've got, I think it's 60 or 70. It's a crazy amount of video modules and stuff in the course, but hopefully this was some good, quick takeaways that you can start using right away.
No, it definitely was. And I've had a little bit of a preview of the course and it's fantastic. I think when you're trying to grow your business and you're not thinking about the importance of the hiring, firing, recruiting process, you're overlooking a huge, huge piece of this. So feel free to reach out to Matt. He can answer any questions you have on that piece. And then for more information on Hearth customer financing, we can also answer any questions you have about the content you saw here today. Feel free to go to gethearth.com. And again, my name is Sarah Krebs. And thank you everyone so much for joining us. We will throw up a poll here and Matt and myself will reach out if you guys are interested in learning more. So thank you everyone and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.